the recording. For this one, just so you know, also this session is being recorded. I'm not going to fully close it yet in case anyone still wants to come in. All right. How's everyone's morning going so far? Good. How was your last session? Good.
Really good.
Mine was really good too.
You gotta be better.
No pressure. No pressure or anything. I think Rich and I are time. All right. All right. So here again, what does the GM do? What does the board do? It's about board GM transition. I'm J.Q. Hanna, the Assistant Director of Food Co-op Initiative. And I come at this topic and this work as someone who was a GM general manager for 9 years at Common Ground Food Co-op under a policy governance board, and actually was there as the board transitioned from working board to policy governance board. Gosh, experienced that. And then as a person who, by the way, loathed policy governance when I was first hired as a general manager and thought it was the silliest thing ever, I've become a huge advocate for governance and with transparent, open, well-communicated relationships between boards and GMs where there really are partners, holding one another accountable and doing good work together. And now do some board coaching, but also have spent a lot of time studying. I've been with SDI for 7.5 years now and studying startups that opened and things didn't go great. Things didn't go and unexpectedly. Startups we thought we'd do better. And one of the core issues we found at the very root of that was the board GM transition and the board's strength going into that transition and knowing how to fulfill their role. You know, I always say sometimes getting a GM feels like being handed the keys to a Maserati when you got your license. Because they know so much you do not know. And you're like, Maserati. All right, you know, do not know how to drive that thing. And so, you know, watching that and realizing, gosh, not only is this hard, it is absolutely critical to the success of co-ops. We have watched startups survive really difficult situations and fail, I think, hinging on the board GM relationship and the board's ability to make decisions about that relationship and stay in power. Even though they have this Maserati, they may not have fully how to work with yet. All right, so that's where I come at it from. Rich, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Rich LaRochelle, I'm a director on the Fredericksburg Food Co-op Board. Prior to retiring, I retired at the end of 2013. I worked for co-ops for 40 years in the electric co-op in the finance space. So my wife and I retired to Fredericksburg, Virginia, because our only grandchild is there. And I'm a full-time volunteer. So I got involved with this food co-op. We incorporated in 2015 and opened last year on April 1st. So, and we've gone through the whole transition of being going from being a working board. We had no employees until we hired our GM, and then to becoming a governing board. So we've gone through that transition. So happy to be here and share what we did.
And he's not going to mention it so well. When he says 40 years in co-ops, he's an expert in cooperative governance and from a different industry that looks at policy governance a little differently. Food co-ops actually have a kind of unique take on policy governance from most other cooperative industries. So he brings some really important, unique perspective to the conversation. I'm really excited to be presenting with Rich. So, our objectives, real quickly, what you can expect from the session, what we're trying to do today. We want you to leave with clarity about why the GM's role isn't the same at every co-op, but instead defined by the board. Information about how the board defines the GM's role and one possible process for doing that several startups have now used. Information about where the board should stay fully engaged when the GM arrives and beyond. And we hope to also walk away with tips and core things to have in place to be ready to fully engage as a governing board once you have a GM. Okay, so that's kind of what we're hoping you'll walk away with. We did teaser in the description, lots of tips, and then we're going to get there. We're going to do a lot of other stuff first. Okay? So we're going to talk first of the GM's role. I'll spend a lot of time from the GM role, and Rich is going to jump in anywhere whenever he's comfortable, and then he's going to talk about the board's role, and I'll be jumping in once in a while. We're going to take turns here. So let's bust some myths about the GM role and define it. Oh, what did I do there? Okay. Oh, we're gonna work on this one together. Where are markers? markers. Markers, there, good. I want to ask you a question. I'm going to ask you, what have you heard about what the GM role will be once you have a GM? What they'll be able to handle on their own, what that will be like. What are some of the things you've heard, coming to conferences, talking to each other? What have you heard about what the GM does?
Hiring all the staff.
Okay. So GM hires all staff. Okay. Any other things you've heard about this GM who will eventually show up in your store? And what they'll do?
The project during construction.
Manage project during construction. Okay. I have terrible handwriting and spelling. Forgive me, good. That would be a J. Okay. What else we got?
Manages operations.
Thank you. Manages operations. What else we got?
The last session said that they do crisis management on opening day.
You'll be going home to bed that night. They will not. The day my store's expansion opened, I did not go to bed. I was up 48 hours. Other things the GM's going to do.
Budget. Yeah.
Budget?
Finances.
Finances. Budget, finances. Okay. What else we got?
Suppliers.
Set up suppliers. Okay. Okay. What else?
Reporting.
So we'll be reporting to the board, and actually, I think you mean by that reporting,
Yeah.
like data.
Yes.
Data and reporting to board.
The unicorn GM does everything.
Yeah. Oh, you've gotten my theme already. Anything else you guys have heard?
Marketing.
That they lead market. Anything else about this mythical beast you heard?
Sets the tone for store experience.
Set the tone for store experience.
Thinks about product mix and product selection.
Mm-hmm. Product mix. Oh my god, I can't understand what I'm writing. Okay. Are there any other last thoughts? Like,
Makes the board's vision a reality.
makes board vision a reality. Uh-huh.
Sorry.
I got room for a couple more here. What we got?
Trains and coaches, managers.
Ah, trains and coaches managers.
Do we have volunteers for that?
Do what?
Trains and coaches volunteers.
Oh, well, we can put it on here. There's no wrong answers to this one. Okay. Any other things people have heard about the magical unicorn known as the GM? Okay. All right. We're going to start there and set that one aside. Rich, you want to help us out with this other one? I can be your note taker.
Okay. Okay, what have you heard about what the board's role will be once the co-op has a GM? Is everything all done for the board? You don't really need the board anymore?
Go on
People like
vacation.
Steve here.
Quit and get a new board.
I'm sorry. What? The unicorn board? Yeah. Okay, any clues on what the board's role will be?
Oversee the
Yeah.
GM? Oh, sorry.
Oversee the GM,
Okay.
okay, yep.
Set policies.
Set policy, okay, policy.
Okay.
Policy versus operations, I love it. Others, back here? No?
Review reports.
Review reports, okay, sounds pretty boring, but all right. Yes,
Pivot in, to respond to differences in expectations.
okay. Differences in expectations, pivoting, okay.
Outreach.
Outreach, what do you mean by outreach?
Just continue to spread the word and be out in the community.
Okay, community outreach, right, Char.
Also to support the GM.
Support the GM, okay, okay, great. Others, there was another hand up over here. Others? I mean, we have a whole page here. Yeah.
Financial accountability.
Financial accountability, all right, all right. What do you mean by that?
Hold the GM accountable.
Hold the GM accountable, okay, hold the GM accountable, all right. All right, Steve, what do you think? One of my favorite GMs here.
I was trying to be an observer and I'll be,
You've been called out.
my unicorn horn is showing apparently.
The board role, once you have a GM.
Once they have a GM and a startup, you've been a startup GM.
Social media, support, liking and sharing and blowing things up, making things go viral.
Ah.
Is very helpful for what
Co-op's
we have
biggest
going on
fan.
when we're
Okay.
trying to get, yeah.
Like it, being a megaphone.
Yeah, exactly,
Okay.
amplify, pump up the volume.
Yes.
I think to add to that, networking. So,
Networking, what do you mean by networking? Networking where?
well, financial networking, so that gaining additional ownership or
Okay, okay.
owners.
Okay,
as
owner
well as-
growth, okay,
yeah,
wonderful, I like that.
And other
Okay.
financial opportunities to help.
Okay,
grow.
owner growth and looking for other financial opportunities, very
Okay.
good, yep.
Maybe thinking through the strategy.
Thinking through strategy, okay, strategy being a board role, got it? Yep, yes.
The vision.
The vision.
and the mission.
The
stays
vision
with
and the
the
mission,
board.
okay, looking at it
Representing
strategically.
the owners.
Yeah, why are we here? Okay. Kathy, what do you think?
I would have said vision and mission.
Vision and mission, all right. Another vote for vision and mission. Others here? Going once?
What about future? What about, like, what's next?
Okay, future next.
Expansion or-
Yep, the future, keeping that focus on the future.
Strategic planning.
Strategic planning, okay. I think we got room for
Okay.
one more, yep.
One more.
Being a good boss.
Being a good boss. All right, here we go, yay, second applause.
Spoken like a true GM.
Team is
All
also
right.
of a startup.
All right, excellent.
We have 2 startup GMs in the room.
All right, good, I think you got a lot of great ideas here.
All right, good. We wanted to get all that out in the open. And what we didn't hear was this, but you guys often tell me this, okay? Which is, and then one day this magical creature called the GM will arrive, and then the board will be able to sit back and let this retail savvy unicorn with all the skills that Quote could ever possibly need do the rest.
Dream on.
And, well, I'm glad to hear that. When I first started being around startups a lot, this wasn't far off. There's some people who opened a long time ago or a while ago who have been around for a while who are going, I remember hearing that. I remember hearing about this. The GM will show up and you're just going to sit back because they're going to handle everything, just do what they say, it's all good. And then, about 5 years ago, we started seeing startups open that were expected, great market studies, did all the work, they were expected to be rock stars. And they opened 40% of their sales. Several of them. And some of them were culturally floundering, and we'd never seen this before. And boards were like, well, we told the GM would handle it. Like, stay in your lane, right? And that's when we started to question exactly how the board and GM interact sometimes, is when this started to happen. So, this question, who's responsible for the co-op's success once the GM is hired?
Board.
Everybody.
I'd say shared.
Board.
Everybody, but, and I've been a GM, since the person's been a GM. It's my job, and I can walk away when I want. You are fiscally and legally responsible. You were democratically elected to represent the ownership, and you are the ones who legally are in charge.
We're also the ones that fired the GM that's not working, right?
The GM is fully invested, full team member, needs to be treated as a full team member. Cannot say enough about you guys working as equals in strategy, working together, but you're the one who's responsible to make sure they're successful. You took a piece of your responsibilities to open and run a successful food co-op business that meets the values of your owners and delegated it, which was a brilliant move, delegated it to somebody with the skills to do it, but it was your responsibility, okay? So this is the piece that I think sometimes got lost with the unicorn myth, okay? Is that you will be the ones who will stay responsible. So I can always, this is real malfeasance, I can leave and get another job, okay? Not saying we don't pour our hearts and souls into it. Like I said, I worked 48 hours straight to open my store, and I can tell you a lot more stories, and we can all tell you stories. But you're the ones who are responsible in the end. So you've got the elected board. I like images, they help me. And this person represents hundreds of owners. They have put the responsibility for the financial health and legal well-being of the co-op on you. They have elected you to define and meet their values, and they've delegated to you running a business in alignment with all of that, financial, legal health, and meeting values. That got put on you. They didn't elect a GM. That was a decision you made. Okay, so the GM role is. What do you think, Rich? What do you think about that one?
Yeah, I mean, so our board has gone from being a governing board, a working board, like all of you probably are before you open. We didn't have, any staff. Some startups hire a project manager or that kind of thing. We didn't do that. So we went from being a working board to being a governing board. We actually went through about 1.5 years of training to do that. We developed our policies. We got training with Colluminate. We got training with JQ. And there's really a mind shift that has to happen because we all really want the co-op to be successful. And the co-op and the co-op GM and the co-op board are really part of the same team. They have to be working together. They've got the same goals. But in terms of what the GM's responsibilities are, I mean, some things are really obvious, right? So there's a whole process you go through in determining what's governance and what's really operations. It's, as JQ was saying, the board delegates this responsibility to the GM, and the board decides what to delegate, how to delegate, and what the timing of that is. That's the process we went through. And it's something that I think deserves time and a lot of attention, and our co-op put a lot of time and attention into it. And it will also evolve over time. Just because on day one, the board has more involvement in community outreach, event planning, a lot of financial things. Over time, depending upon the growth of the co-op and the capabilities of the board and the GM, things might really change over time. But this process still is the same. It's the board's job to determine that kind of delegation.
So this is.
Yep, we've got a question back.
Hey.
At what point in the process, and I don't mean to take this in a different direction, but do you start that training, that learning so that you're ready when the start opens to make that full switch? Or I guess maybe when you onboard your GM that you're ready to switch?
We started about 1.5 years before we opened, so it's good to start earlier. Our co-op was very involved in just trying to make it happen. And as you all know, it's not for sure it's going to happen until it happens. So, from the very beginning, there were 5 of us in 2015. We just kind of put it out there. We visited Friendly City. We visited other co-ops. We did the whole thing. We came to the conference. But you put it out there in the community. You don't know if it's going to really happen. So we're really focused on that. And then when it really became clear that this baby is going to open, then we're about 1.5 years out from opening, and we really said, all right, we need to really stop. We need to write formal policies. There are some startups who write white papers about a whole bunch of things. They put a lot of time into policy. Sometimes they never open. And what we wanted to do is, okay, we have a path to opening. We're going to put all of our energy into what it takes to open the co-op. And so we didn't do as much as we should have done on policies. I felt bad about that. As an old co-op guy, I felt like, geez, I should be leading the board into putting more time and attention into that. And so about 1.5 years, we really pivoted, and we got training. There's a great template that Colluminate has on policy governance. We used that. We talked to Steve at Friendly City. He was very generous in his time. And so was our other co-op, Roanoke. That's a long way of saying it simply takes time. You can't just flip a switch and say, I'm going to go from a working board to a governing board. It's a mind shift, and you need policies around it. It needs to be intentional, and you need to have the whole board engaged and involved in it.
We're going to talk about that a lot more later, but I think it's a really good thing that Rich just pointed out is that this is a challenge because we tell all startups, you should start your policy work already, you should start your policy work already, you should start your governance work already. And you're talking to a person who believes in policy, loves governance, and he was like, we needed to finish raising money and figure out if it was even gonna open. So there's going to be a tension. I think what Fredericksburg did right was the second they're like, oh, this is a go. Like we got little things to do still, but this is gonna go. They flipped and found capacity to start working on policy and governance and understanding governance. But I've seen some startups do that same thing, but they were on a tighter timeline and they did not get enough time in training and understanding before the GM showed up. And I've seen a lot of boards that started this a month after the GM showed up. It's a little tougher. Sometimes you get lucky because the GM's just already understands policy, governance, or something like that, but it's late in the game. All right, we're going to keep this moving for a little bit. But this is sometimes still a controversial statement for some folks, and it shouldn't be. It's right there in policy governance, even for policy governance wonks. It says the board creates, the first policy you create after the ends is the board management relationship policy. And it basically says the board will hire an executive called the GM and delegate blank to them. Now they'll use the word operations. I was so glad you brought that up. Because everyone's like, okay, so we know what the GM's role is operations. What's operations? Can somebody tell me? We're gonna come back to that. Okay. All right, just again, I don't know why I did this again. I harp on things. You thousands of owners that elected you chose, if you do, chose to use policy governance. Well, what governance switch? I know a couple food co-ops, quite successful, that are not using policy governance. But they're using something pretty similar. You're gonna some kind of delegation governance agreement. And you choose your governance system, you decide to delegate what? To the GM, and then the GM takes things from there, hires the staff and so forth. Again, this is just, I guess I just felt really important to harp on who was in charge of the responsibility. They hired you, not the GM. So real quick, what is what? These are some big loose definitions. We're gonna get a lot more into the operations one. But just when people go, I have not necessarily heard anyone ever define those words. Can you just so governance is the board and the committees that answer directly to the board. They're in charge of the vision ends, organizational strategy, connection to the ownership, hiring the GM CEO, legal and financial oversight and oversight of operations, which is usually them providing oversight. These things are them providing oversight of the GM CEO. So that's usually what we mean by governance in the big broad sense. Operations, GM, and their staff. So hey, people will say the operations team. They mean the GM and anyone the GM hired. That's that. Or if they launched any committees that are specifically, they were the GM's committees. Customer service experience, staffing, HR, marketing and promotions, product selection and offerings, day-to-day operations of the store, operational strategy to meet the budget and ends. These are big, broad. This isn't necessarily exactly what those words actually mean. I'm just giving you what they usually people think of them to mean. If you want more, because we're not going to go into this part real in depth, if you just want more on this basic concept, check out the Startup Leadership Transition Handbook at Food Co-op Initiative's website, or check out the many excellent articles at Coolmate's free library on their website on these topics. So what I said when we first started working together, me and Fredericksburg's board, I think we started working together, because about 3 months before you hired your Jim?
Yep, that sounds about right.
That's right. Okay. So one of the first things I talked about was this, that the board's in charge of defining what the GM's role is, and then someone said, well, that's operations. And so, well, you get to define operations. And so what I always say is, these are the board's crayons. You're drawing the picture, okay? So the board chooses to delegate all operations to the GM through the board's management linkage policy. This means the board defines operations. The GM needs the board to define what is operational in order to succeed at meeting your expectations. It's actually something you owe us. I'm going to talk I've now been board and GM, but I've been GM longer. And actually, lack of clarity about what you think you just delegated to us will cause us all sorts of headaches and nightmares later too as well. We don't know how to build a really good relationship with you when your expectations start sounding like 3 different things and coming from different directions. And if it's operations and I've got a definition and you've got a definition, and then we get to board meetings and start playing, it's like, wait a minute, why do you think you're in charge of that? And I'm defensive because absolutely not.
outreach is part of the operations. You are not doing that. You know, why are you, do you not trust me? And all these things develop because we just didn't have the same definition of the core word that defines our relationship. I didn't know what you meant. You didn't know what I meant. And you know what? I might not know what I mean either. Right? But operations, and you're making up the definition as you play. I watched this. The new GM comes in, wonderful board for Starter Food Co-op, and they're so excited, and the GM starts doing stuff, and they're, but not that. What is it? Oh, you're in charge. Wait, what? Why don't we get? Oh, you know, and it's just, and it can be very for both of you. Like, we're all so excited to work together, and then you're going, what the hell are you doing? I thought we were supposed to say, no, we are totally won't say, what are you? And it just gets very, and it's unnecessary. I've seen tensions and feelings of being undermined, and even, you know, all sorts of tough emotions come up from people who completely respect each other, but they don't know what the other one is trying to do. Okay? So I'm gonna ask you some questions. Mia requests an interview about the co-op's future. Is that governance or operations?
Governance.
You're gonna go on governance. Okay, governance. Owner requests co-op's monthly financial statements. Governance, operations.
Operations. Operations.
Governance, operations. Banning an owner from the store who's threatening staff safety.
Operations.
Operations, right? Interesting. Approving employee policy and pay scale.
Operations.
Governance, operations. Okay. Owner says they were racially profiled in the store.
Operations.
Governance, operations.
Operations.
Okay. Calling an owner meeting.
Governance.
I did slip in one that is absolutely always defined the same. GM cannot call an owner meeting. They can throw an owner party and then get up and talk. But if it's just for the owners,
I think you might have done
if it's just for the owners, no. This is where trust comes in, right? Believe me. I've been a GM and been amazed, like, you know, you or I, the board of GM, can have ill will and we can get away with a lot of things. There's no trust that needs to be here. But signing contracts with national cooperative brochures. I'm surprised you all know that. Good job. The GM may be the absolute primary relationship with NCG, but you are the one signing the legal contracts.
Yep.
Setting or changing owner benefits.
Governance.
Interesting. Governance. Local farmer says GM is not paying invoices.
So governance.
It's operations.
Yep, there's that much word there. Interesting. Agenda for the annual owner meeting. Yeah, I know you're doing. That is you. Now, the board and staff actually may take a major role in putting together the whole day and the plan, but the actual business meeting is yours. Authorizing taking out a new loan.
Governance.
Okay. Approving the annual co-op budget.
Governance.
Defining local.
Governance.
Oh, that's interesting. All right, I'm going to throw a couple of these to our GMs. Amy, an owner requests the co-op's monthly financial statements. What do you think?
I think that can be handled by a GM because you don't have to give that to an owner. So you can point them to the most recent annual report, and that's all you need to do.
Exactly. You guys, if you look at your agreements with your owners, mostly, I mean, I haven't read yours specifically, but 99 times out of 100, you owe them annual financial statements. You don't necessarily owe them statements any other time. But there's times I actually think it's really important to share what's going on with the financials. If the store is in crisis and you're trying to get the owners to rally with you, I think there are times it's absolutely important. But technically, you only have to give them that transparency at annual owner meetings. Also, they can come to board meetings, and financial reporting is usually quarterly. So it's usually handed back to the GM, although the board and I did talk about strategically what we thought about that and how we wanted to handle it. But it was my decision. So I just love to ask, where did that come up? There was one, you guys said governance, I was like, how interesting. Defining local, what do you think, Steve?
I think it's operations.
Okay.
It's operations based on, feedback isn't really the right word, based on knowledge of what the board and the community's expectations are.
Okay.
I mean, it's not just like the GM goes off into the woods and decides.
Amy?
Yeah, I'm pretty opinionated about product policies, I will just say that. You know, I think to some extent, if you're trying to be a very inclusive place, for the board to put into policy specific product requirements really ties a small independent operator's hands. And so I think that, you know, I think that the board can, I think it's great to say that, you know, we are a open and welcoming place that focuses on natural and healthy foods, local foods, but not to like get into the nitty gritty about how many miles away is local or what defines natural or healthy. I think you gotta leave that to your community if you really want them all to come and shop with you.
And this is, you know, and I wanted to hear these perspectives. I'll say there's a lot of different perspectives on that very question. There are plenty of food codes out there, if you go to their website, that say that that is actually set by the board, and it's some that are GM, some together, probably more GM, more operations than governance. What do you think? What do you just decide your call about local?
Our board set the definition of local, which is, and we looked at what Friendly City does and others do. But one of our core goals is local, to buy from local producers as much as possible. And so the board defined it as being in the state of Virginia and within 150 miles radius. And we believe in doing everything collaboratively. We talked with our GM about it. We, you know, shared ideas and thoughts about it. But it's a fundamental reason we have the co-op. It's a fundamental reason that the membership join the co-op. They want local producers. And so so our board defined local as that. And we have a map up in the store that Chris had made that we're going to put pins where we have every local person. So, you know, collaborative, but at the end of the day, the board felt strongly about it, and it's something that, you know, we measure and we set metrics on. So that's the way we did it.
And I want to share this, not because we're going to debate that one. I'm not going to actually get into debating that one any further, because actually, as co-ops could do that all day. But you notice two very strong, well-informed, well-argued opinions about where that goes, operations or governance. You know, and I can make the argument on both sides. And, you know, and so it's, you heard all the times there was in the room. You know, and you also heard times like I was like racial profiling in the store. Customer complaints are almost always that is handled by the GM. That is handled by operations. But that could be so sensitive to your mission and your values. How long do you sit back and see if the GM's got that? That can feel very touchy, and you need to be clear because these things are going to happen. And if you're like the GM's in charge of it, not this time, you're going to cause chaos. Okay? You know, you can look at a situation, I don't mean just to that one, but any situation, so like operations, absolutely, and then you go, oh, that didn't feel good. And that wasn't comfortable. The board can actually sit down with the GM and go, can we process this together? Can we talk about this? And the board can say, we're considering moving where that falls, or some portion of the authority on this one to governance or to needing approval from governance and have a generative conversation. And I certainly had my board have some of those generative conversations with me. And I admit, you know, most of the time I was working to convince them not to do that. And once in a while they convinced me. So you should be able to have positive generative conversations, not ones that are 3-hour board meetings on the night that they're supposed to be actually flipping the store, which is something we can learn to respect about what's going on in GM's lives, what they're doing for your store. But so I want to talk to you about something that I started proposing and talking to startups. And I'm going to talk to your experience about this in the next slide. So I know there's strong opinions in this room about some things belonging to government, some things belonging to the operations. And I'm going to say I'm going to suspend that for a minute and say what I think is most important is that you have thought through which you believe it is, you are clear, you are honest, you are transparent with the GM and board about these pieces, and that you hold them and yourselves accountable to the agreed upon definitions of operations, and you see it as a living conversation, but you do put pins, okay? So what I started doing was just
I was hearing all these tensions from really good GMs and really good boards who were working with each other. And I was like, let's start listing some stuff. Listing some stuff and saying, is that governance? Is that operations? And then we said, wait, there's something else. There's all things that the board said, we want the GM to know we will absolutely have a conversation with them first. We want to be partners, but we will have a decision authority. Or things that were like, we want you to have decision authority, but we would like you to absolutely have a conversation with us before you make the decision. Just let us have input. So we started having these extra columns. Oh, we really want to be partners here. We promise to be partners here to some degree, but we both know where the decision authority is in the end. Okay? It's like, you know, you have a life partner might have very, intense conversations about that job change that I want to make that will cut our income in half. But in the end, no one does get to tell me what to do, maybe. These lines were like, it's yours, but I should have serious input on this, okay? This is important to our joint responsibility. This one, propose, approve, is what came in last. And that was, we are kind of agreeing to consensus. One of us is proposing, the other does have to approve and agree. And sometimes that's one directional, that's one you'll see more often. Like the GM will do all of this work to put together a plan for your second store or whatever, and you've asked them to do that. But eventually they will come to you and say, this is the plan, here's the pro forma, here's the everything, and you are going to do this or this. Again, generative conversation the whole way along, hopefully, so it's obvious it's going to be this. But in the end, they are proposing, you are approving. You didn't actually give up the decision power in that. But that tends to kind of fall here where you're going to be making the decision along the way so much together that it's pretty much a joint decision. Okay? So we started taking some topics and asking some of those questions and saying, so I'm going to ask one of these questions again. Let's see, let's take one. Where was there anything where there was a little uncertainty? No, that was all local farmer. Local farmer says GM's not paying invoices. Not paying invoices always obvious. Let's see. Actually, I was interested. That one was easy. Media request to interview about the co-op's future. Actually, y'all said governance. I'll let you know that is very uncommon once you have a GM. That is very uncommon that that's governance. Again, there's usually a conversation, an agreement. Steve's going to talk with his board and say, we're announcing this big new thing. Media might approach you. Let's agree. I would like to take all those, or my marketing person, or let's agree that you'll be point person on X, but it comes through my people, and then we'll put them in contact with the board chair. Again, generative conversation, but it is usually completely operations because he's aware of what's going on in the community, what the buzz is, and what we need the buzz to be, and when we need it to hit, and when it can't come out yet, and so he's got knowledge you don't have. So, but it can vary. So, taking a look now at these 5 choices, I'm going to ask for hands on this one, so I'm yelling at once and I can tell who's saying what. Where would you put the media approaches the co-op for a statement on X? Where would you put that? Which one of the 5 would you pick?
Fully operations.
Fully operations now, okay. Yeah.
Yellow, strongly partner.
Yeah.
Strongly partner.
Strongly partner.
Okay, strongly partner. Anyone with any different opinions? Yeah.
I think strongly partner to your governance decision.
Governance.
Yeah, I really think, you'd have to have a GM that's really, really bought into the mission of the organization and to have that trust. And so, yeah, I think just because we haven't reached that step yet, I'm nervous about handing that over.
I think you're bringing up a good point. Also, we're not going to talk about it too much today, but in the transition to policy governance with the GM and to getting to full policy governance, I don't think I should run policy governance as soon as they get there. If you're using it, you're just building the trust to hand over all the authority. And I think it's fine to say, we want those coming to us, but we agree that we absolutely will notify the GM as soon as we get that request. And if you get the input to us in time, because those are usually tight, we absolutely would be interested in your opinion on how to handle that. And then maybe once you've got that GM's been there for a while, like, oh my God, this GM's got the mission down, their marketing person's awesome, that might go right over here. Yeah, it can move. It can move. If we're clear, transparent, honest, that that's what's happening. Also, if we're clear and willing to say to the GM to go, I think it's time for that to go here. And we're going to listen and have a real conversation about it. Okay?
So, deciding owner benefits, one more I'm gonna run. I'm gonna ask for hands. Which column would you put deciding owner benefits? Got any hands, deciding owner benefits? One right there?
Fully governance.
Fully governance.
Propose approved.
Propose approved. Where would you put defining owner benefits?
Strongly partnered governance. isn't it?
Governance decision. Okay. Yeah.
I think it might depend on what kind of benefit it is, like if you're talking about, the patronage rebates or things like that, but if it's like discounts, for owners or something like that, then maybe that's operational.
Okay. So I will say again, we're not here to settle these questions today. We're here to talk about that you need to settle them. And you need to, and we're talking about the process and where the GM's rules and where yours is. But just for fun, Amy, where does deciding owner benefits go?
I would say strongly partnered governance decision.
Okay. See, don't assume you know either what your GM's going to think. Every GM and every board has their own characteristics, and this is why we say have a process to have a terrific conversation and agreements. Okay. So. Deciding on what partner orgs can use the classroom. This comes up a lot. You fought to pay for that classroom.
Yeah.
It is central to your mission. Also in the middle of the store and causes so many headaches for your staff. Who gets to decide who gets to use the part? What if one of your partners who made a big donation to the co-op wants a regular contract to use that classroom every Monday night? You decide, or does the GM decide? What do you guys think?
I would say that the board should define the parameters. Like if it's related to mission and vision, absolutely. And then once that policy is set, then operations would handle it.
That's one possible way of doing it. Other opinions on where that would fall?
Fully operational.
Fully operations. Okay, well, we got over here.
Yeah, I would say strongly partnered. I think, especially if the classroom is a money maker, and you're trying to get revenue from that, it depends on the strategy.
Factors. I love how he's bringing. There's all sorts of factors. So you're saying strongly partnered, but the GM gets to decide. Okay, Steve, I'm putting you on the spot this time.
I would agree, but really underlying what's easy about all of this is if the board has policies on like financial condition, which a GM reports on 4 times a year, financial condition and activities, and the board is making decisions that could have an impact on the financial performance of the cooperative. Product policy, if you're only gonna sell vegan food, how successful are you actually gonna be? And I would agree with the board creating the parameters. I mean, all of the policy governance is based on the bowls and the different sizes of the bowls, and you could create a tighter bowl or a looser bowl if you wanted to on what the parameters are, and then let the operations staff. It's not even the GM at the point of 10 years down the road for us. It's like the marketing and. I think the bigger question is deciding on at what point you get rid of the classroom because it's not a financial. Turn the classroom into a kitchen, just cranking out the money and drawing.
But this is interesting. 10 years down the road, this is the marketing staff's job. Again, this might be something that maybe you're like, oh, we definitely want this, and then the trust is built. And it just moves, and you realize your organization. In my home co-op, when we go to open the classroom, same thing though, it was an expansion. The first time we ever had a classroom, and the board was like, oh my God, the classroom, they work so hard, my classroom. And we agreed, so central to our mission. But what we agreed was that the operations team would set a policy for the classroom use, and that the board strongly partnered, meaning they get to give us input once, and then we would make our decision. And then if we were going to change the policy in the classroom, that we'd notify them. And then they came to trust us and they forgot about that, but. Okay, all right. Just for a second, Rich, can I have you talk about, this is your current financial conditions definitions. I wonder if you could talk a little bit just about the process your board went through and how this felt or how some of these X's ended up where they did.
Okay, first of all, let me say, all of this is a collaborative process with the GM, right? The board gets to decide, what's delegated, but it's got to be collaborative. We're all on the same team. In terms of the financial area, which is really key to the co-op's future, the co-op's success, we went through each of these items, and we did this in other areas as well, the ends, operations, and so forth. And we looked at, for example, the annual budget. So the GM proposes a budget, the board approves it, with modifications if needed. Setting the board budget is completely a board role. Now, we want to be reasonable. If you get and our board budget is way below the average food co-op kind of, recommended budget, because we just can't see spending, all that money, because for a bunch of reasons. Authorizing indebtedness, I think that's probably every single co-op is probably that way. I mean, the GM really doesn't have the ability, the authority. Our board did not delegate to the GM the authority to incur debt. I can't imagine a GM wanting that authority. Authorizing applying for grants. So in our co-op, if we want to apply for a grant, which we may be doing for like our Food for All program, so our community foundation has come to us and said, hey, you might want to apply for the grant. So we'll probably do that. We would always talk with the GM about that. We look at where the abilities are to write the grant. I might be the one writing the grant. If there's someone in the co-op staff who's got the bandwidth to write it, they can write it. But it's a collaborative kind of process, Writing a grant is a lot of work. And if the GM's like trying to focus on the operations of the store, he or she may not have the time to do it. Working on applying for grants, the same, we kind of basically said, whoever proposes it, gets to do it. But I mean, the reality is, if we all think it's a good idea, applying for a grant does require board approval, because you're putting kind of the reputation of the co-op on the line. We'll really look at where the skill sets are to do it. Authorizing, accepting restricted funds agreements, again, that's something propose, approve, we're both going to be in there. We have not had a single case like that. That's not something that has happened to us. Financial reporting is completely the GM and his or her staff have to do the reporting. And approving the reports is done by the board. Some of this is pretty common sense kind of thing. But we go through a process. We actually spent, as I was saying earlier, about 1.5 years going through our policy governance policies, and we spend a lot of time on this, and we revisit it annually. And as JQ was saying, even though this may be the way things look now, they can shift over time, and it's a conversation with the GM. We're not trying to not give the GM authority because we want to hoard authority or that kind of thing. It's really what's best for the whole co-op and how this whole team can work together to make this co-op successful. We find this tool to be really, really helpful. In a lot of ways, it helps us as a board to think through the process, and then it helps the communication. So everyone kind of knows, okay, all right, we want to apply for a grant. All right, well, what did we say about that? Well, we said, it's got to be jointly approved. Or, I mean, whatever it is. We have in writing, on paper, that we've talked about and we've collaborated on, and we share with the GM, and then he might say, well, I really think you need to move this way or move that way, and we say, okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and we do that. So that's kind of this tool. Again, I find it really, really, really helpful. It's a simple tool, but a really helpful tool.
And the great thing I will say with this tool too is I think you guys are a couple, so we did them together, and then they talked to their GM and moved some stuff, and those were in place not even a full year, and you guys kind of went back because they had found 3 new things they needed to add. This is important to the relationship too, and then you and the GM hit a place where the GM goes, whoa, what did you just pull? And hopefully you have an honest, generative conversation like, I thought that was operations. What just happened there? You have a good conversation, you codify what you agree to so they know they can trust you next time to remember you agreed to that. It's a trust building tool, okay? And so to me, this is policy, if you know policy governance, you have your policies, your board management relationship definition, which is you're going to give operations to the GM. This is the slice in between there before you get to the ELs. Then you define operations. This is just an extra tool to do that. Okay? It's a living, generative thing. We're not going to go any further with it today because we have more stuff that I really want you guys to hear from Rich. But there are 4 learning areas of defining operations so far: finance, outreach, ownership, and ends. These are the places that tend to get touchy, or where the definitions tend to be different and you didn't realize it. Okay, so if it's something like, whether or not we're going to carry eaten foods when there's a boycott, that's a product thing. I am going to encourage you to say, like, I don't even have a chart for product stuff, okay? Here's a reason. These are the areas where there is some overlap, where there is some questions, okay? And what I was doing when I pulled this out is making a list of things I'm going to add to the Dropbox. You're going to be getting Dropbox in everyone's presentations. I'm going to add, I think you said it was okay, all your guys' definitions currently. So I'm going to add all of Fredericksburg's spreadsheets like you just saw for each of the areas.
Thank you.
I'm also going to give you a link of what you just saw to play with. Keep in mind, also I'm going to put Siobhan on the spot. I gave them the tool at Acibet, and they started playing with it, and she came back and was like, we added some stuff, is that okay? We kind of messed with it. What was your experience with that? Like, you looked at it and you're like, so what did you guys end up adding?
We actually added an operations tab,
Okay.
right? And so we've listed out a whole bunch of stuff that we think everybody would look at it and say, okay, well, that's operations. But for some of them, there are places where we want to have that partnered conversation.
Yeah, you guys messed with my, there's no operations tab. First of all, there is no operation, there's no, store operate, no. And then, but what you guys is actually, their GM requested it because they were noticing places where the board had internal definitions that they were not aware of and that needed to be talked about. And so they did go back and add it in. It's a living thing is what I mean. I'm gonna hand you a spreadsheet. It's a blank spreadsheet. Use it, list whatever you want on the side, add tabs. That's so far what people are doing with it. And I think you're gonna talk more about you guys, are you gonna talk anything about that in your session?
The spreadsheet?
Just about defining operations together?
A little bit.
Okay,
but yeah.
Okay, so real quick, so I'm behind. This is gonna be the slides, you're gonna slide deck. Steps, get board training and defining operations and/or facilitation. I do recommend this. We've got even, Rich is an expert in co-op governance. He had someone come in so he could just sit back and be part of the process rather than run it themselves. It does make it run better. This is a place to look for possible outside facilitation and training. Board creates a draft of definitions pre-GM. I do suggest you do it before the GM shows up and find out what you believe, okay, and what you think. And personally, if I was interviewing for your GM job, I'd say, show it to me. Because I'd be like, oh, no, I'm sorry. But that is something, too. I mean, honestly, as a GM, if I got that chart and I was like, oh, holy, I would know where I'm at and decide if I can work for that board. It's not a bad thing. Review the draft with the GM once hired, get their input. Board decides where to integrate GM input and informs GM. Again, it's strongly partnered, but it is a board decision. And then the board ratifies, review it annually, making additions, removals, changes, or as things come up where you hit that, and you're both, the board or the GM can go, can we talk about this chart? we hit something here, okay? But it's a living document, keep revising it. All right. Don't hand all this stuff off at once. By the way, all this authority, we're not going to talk about GM board transition. That's what Siobhan's going to do. So people come to that. That's today at 1 p.m. Because it is a day. And we just defined operations, and you got hired last week. Here you go. That, no GM chief would want that. They might want you to give that faster. I probably would want you to give faster than you want to. But don't just throw it at them. You have to learn how to decide what is operational and then at what speed to turn that authority over. That's going to be talked about in that session. We're not going to touch it today. Okay? Not in this one. All right. You're driving. Do you want the clicker or should you want me to click for it?
That's okay, you can click.
All right.
So, board training and education is really critically important. And hopefully you don't have a lot of board turnover, that's helpful. Whether you do or whether you don't, every board member really needs to independently understand what their role is and what the co-op is all about. I'm going to, what's under, yeah, okay, so we already covered this. I mean, JQ talked about, you know, so let's pretend for a moment that you hire a GM, and then the co-op is doing really, really poorly. As we talked about, it is the board's responsibility that the co-op be successful. A lot of GMs don't make it past a year. We're very lucky, we hired a great GM, but every GM has strengths and weaknesses. Every one of us has strengths and weaknesses. No one of us is perfect. And so the board can't just say, I've got a GM here, she's handling all this thing, I don't really need to know anything anymore. That's a formula for failure, and if something does happen to the GM, let's pretend he or she is the best in the world, they get run over by a truck, they have a sickness, they take another job, you know, what do? You've got to stay educated, there's no substitute. If you don't want to stay educated and be trained, really, those board members shouldn't be on the board. These are the stats that we talked about. You know, unfortunately, 50% of the GMs hired during COVID are no longer there. The track record in the past was even worse.
The last 5 years,
The last 5 years, yeah.
90% of GMs weren't there more than 12 to 18 months.
So it just brings home the fact that you guys were elected, you're on the board, and you got that responsibility.
We're just saying you're going to have to know something. Do we know why? Oh, that's a whole nother session, yes. If we could talk about it, I would invite Amy too. but it's a whole other session.
So I'm going to talk about 4 key areas. One is finance, okay? So my background is in finance. That's not true of all of the co-op board members on our board, but every single co-op board member on the board needs to have a basic grasp of the co-op finances. So if you think about the pro forma, you know, which is a 10 or 15 year forecast of how the co-op's going to do after it opens, that document is the basis on which you as a board go to the membership and you say, we believe as a board that this co-op is going to be financially viable, and we're asking you to consider investing your hard-earned money in the co-op. Okay, so no board member should agree to a member loan campaign or a member preferred stock campaign unless they understand the basis on which you're asking people to put their money, and that's probably an SEC requirement too, or some kind of a legal requirement. You are saying as a board, we believe this thing is going to work, and the basis of that is your pro forma. So you've got to have a basic understanding. You don't have to be an accountant. You don't have to be a master in finance. You've got to understand that. You've got to have a baseline understanding, and that goes for every single board member. There's only and it's not rocket science, okay? Colluminate has very good training sessions. They do like this thing where it's four training sessions, an hour and a half each. FCI has training sessions, bringing in consultants, having people from a local university. A board member should understand an income statement, a balance sheet, a cash flow, just at a basic level. You've just got to understand it. And you got to understand the pro forma, and not relying on 1 or 2 people. Okay, ends, visions.
There you go, to jump there.
So the ends vision. It's really the why. Why are you doing the co-op? Okay. In our case, before we opened, we spent months thinking about, you know, why do we want to do this, and we came to these 4 things, which is local, you know, local foods. Number 2, the environment, centering everything we do around environmental sustainability. 3rd is a community, sharing information on the link between food and health. And 4th is operating a financially strong community-owned business. And so that was really the why, okay? So we hire a GM. We want the GM to meet what we want to see happen on the why. I mean, the ends aren't some vague thing that you would hire a GM and say, okay, tell us why we're doing this co-op. Well, if you don't know why you're doing the co-op, why did you form it? You know, it's kind of fundamental. And kind of the other thing from a governance perspective is, you know, we spent 5.5 years getting this co-op up and running. We have a sense of what metrics we want to see. So, for example, some people will say when it comes to an end, the GM can develop any reasonable interpretation of the end. So you spend all this life energy into something you believe in around these 4 things like local, environmental sustainability, then you say, but I don't have a clue what that means. I'm going to have someone else interpret it for me. Come on, give me a break. I mean, you've got an idea as a board. What do you want for local? It's a certain percentage. I mean, what's reasonable? You want to be reasonable, but you want to move towards something. What do you want for environmental sustainability? So I think the board having an idea of what they're looking for and then working collaboratively with the GM to achieve that, that's kind of the model that we think makes the most sense. And we might be a little bit on the edge on that. I come from a different co-op sector that really follows something like policy governance, but our board always had metrics for our staff. I was on the staff, I was a senior staff person, for our staff to achieve. It doesn't, and that's something you talk about, you have interaction, you have communication about. So I feel pretty strongly about this issue, but it's kind of the why of the co-op. And so the board should understand the why.
This is probably the most controversial slide up here, I'll just say that, and I think that also for those of you who are experienced GMs, who are like, keep in mind that we're opening a startup, and we have watched GMs open a store that was nothing like what was promised to the owners, but technically meets the ends, because they hadn't built enough relationship between the board and the GM yet, when they hired them, obviously, to realize that person had no intention of interpreting the ends the way the owners had. So this can shift over time too. I will say at my established co-op, which was policy governance, this was strongly partnered. We actually went over the ends definition every year because I didn't want to work to an ends definition all year that they didn't agree with, and I did want their input. I was left with authority on it, but we had a really strongly partnered conversation, and they would give me a list of metrics that they'd like to see. And then I had to either use them or explain why I didn't.
Sure.
And so there's different ways to approach that.
Right.
So, but, you know, I think Rich is onto something, and this is actually common in other co-op industries.
So it's a common sense thing too, you know, and we're all on the same team. So it's not like the board is saying, you know, like dictating and not giving the GM or the staff any kind of responsibility, but we want them to buy into all this. GM assessment and reporting, obviously, you know, that's a key part of policy governance, that basically, we're delegating responsibility to the GM, but we need a window into seeing how the operation is going, and we get that through these reports. Now, some GMs love doing these reports, some GMs don't love doing it. And I think, from a board perspective, you got to have common sense about it. Just to have a voluminous report for the sake of having a voluminous report is really not, it doesn't have to like have a weight test, you know, but what's the information you really want? And let's try to find a path for the GM to prepare that information for us in a way that is least difficult for the GM. So if there's another report that's being developed anyway that will meet the requirement, let's take that report. And over time, you know, I think reports will become more, you know, routine and more probably easy to read for the board. But let's see, noticing strengths and weaknesses. Obviously, that's also a key role of the board. It's got to be done with sensitivity and with mutual respect. As I said earlier, of course, none of us are perfect. We all have strengths and weaknesses. What do we want for the GM and for the board? We all want to, you know, build on our strengths. It's usually easier to build on strengths than to correct weaknesses. So try to, you know, go with the strengths, and when an area is very weak, it needs to be improved. If there's not adequate financial information, if there are clear gaps in terms of behavior, they need to be addressed, and the board has to give that honest feedback in a respectful way. Not the easiest board role, but a very important board role.
And waiting for the annual, you know, review once you've hired a GM and you're a startup is a little like, you're like, that's for the annual review, like, eh.
Yeah. So if something happens that is just really shouldn't be happening, just sit down as you would in your own family and talk to the GM about it and just say, listen, this, you talk it through. They may have information that you don't know about, and so you go into it without, not in a hostile way, not in a defensive way, but in a way of saying, you know, this is going on, it shouldn't be going on, let's talk this thing through. And you may get information from the GM that changes your viewpoint. So don't let things build up. Just have that open dialogue.
Yeah, Amy?
For me, one of the beauties of policy governance, and I was also a fan of policy governance, but is that it says that the board has the authority and kind of the responsibility to get third-party authentication of the GM's reports. And
Yeah.
so, you know, our board had our accountant come in and annually and verify that, you know, we were doing things right operationally. We would have our insurance agent come and evaluate that our asset protection was adequate. We would, the board, when we were very new to startup, conducted a staff survey, which is a little bit crossing some lines there, but that's what we could afford. And then when we got bigger, you know, we would have a staff survey done so that there's an external verification that the GM's treatment of staff and compensation is good. That's what we used our member surveys for as well, so that when the GM is reporting on member satisfaction or member participation, there's an external, and for a GM, that's nice to have that external report, because it's not like, well, just take my word for it. Trust me.
We wouldn't just
Trust but verify.
I think what happens
I
with
agree
both
with
of
you.
these, though, is that we see a lot of gyms and startups because it's chaos, and your gym, you know it. You know your gym's working 90 hours a week, and we're getting no reports, you know. And this is much more common in startups, and going, well, we just have to accept that. You do need to know where you can't accept that. And for more rapid feedback, I'll just give an example. When we started doing some of this policy governance financial reporting work with my board didn't, you know, was pointing out what they weren't thrilled with my financial reports and what they weren't seeing, but they didn't wait a whole year. So very respectfully take me aside and say, gonna really strongly recommend you get training on how to do financial reporting. We believe you understand this, but we can't tell from what you're generating. We're recommending you get some support here. That wasn't offensive. That was like, this is causing issues now, why would we wait a year to tell you? You know? Okay. Last one.
Community connection. So, you know, the board is elected by the community. In general, the board has deep roots in the community, or else the co-op wouldn't exist. You know, we trade on our relationships to get people to make loans. You know, in our co-op, we had close to 300 people who made loans to the co-op. They did that because they trusted the board. They trusted individuals on the board. We represented the co-op. We have deep connections with the local newspapers. We have deep connections with the city council. We have deep connections with elected representatives. We have deep connections in our neighborhoods. And just to say we've now hired a GM and so we're going to step back and we're not going to engage in any of that, that's not doing the best job we can for the co-op. So let's work as a team, and let's have the co-op have the best community connections we can have. So our co-op has an events committee. We've had, one of the reasons we opened in 5.5 years is that we had, you know, we do 4 or 5 events every month. They tend to be cooking classes, you know, things on the environment, nutrition classes. We do music at the co-op twice a month. We had a session earlier this week that 45 people came to on foraging for mushrooms. We do a lot of events. A lot of co-ops do that. We have an events committee. We have 4 or 5 people on the events committee, and we coordinate with the general manager. Our view is anything that happens in the store, we get the GM's approval before we do it. So we do events in the store. We make sure that the space in the store is available. We have an outdoor patio and an indoor seating area. But the events committee has connection with a bunch of people who can do these events and do them in a way that's really compelling. We don't put that on the co-op staff to do that. Now, there may come a time when the co-op has a really great marketing person or outreach person, and it'll navigate there, and that's great. But I do think keeping member and board involvement in that differentiates the co-op from other organizations. That's how we're different from other grocery stores. I mean, they can hire someone who does an event, and sometimes they do that, but they don't have a group of people like us in the community who are plugged in and connected with the hospital, with the university, you know. So a bunch of people will come to us and say, like, there's this group called the Golden Environmental Global Awards, and we have a group called Fossil Free Fredericksburg. They want to have a showing of that at our co-op. We're doing that on May 25th. We have Friends of the Rappahannock who do events at our co-op, so we schedule it for them. We have all those connections.
And then during the last session that his GM was in, the GM raved about the board taking this off the staff's plate. So this does not have to be controversial.
Right, and let me just say about that, and it's not controversial, it's collaborative. And Chris will be there, the co-op staff will be there, we all have fun together. But it's a way of the board and the membership that aren't on the board, that they're volunteers. We've had 250, 300 people volunteer over the course of our co-op. They table at different events, at the farmer's market every Saturday. Again, it's what a co-op is.
We're going to go through our tips real quick. We only got a couple more minutes with you guys. Policies, build your policies ASAP, start them early, spend time on them. The boilerplate is on the Columinate website. It's good, it's a great place to start. It's absolutely, there's no reason to reinvent that. Start with it and then start learning what they mean and tweaking it for your co-op. It will keep happening as you begin to understand more what they mean as you have to evolve into having a gym, but get started. Define obligations, get started before the GM arrives because you want to know your beliefs and your biases before the GM shows up, okay, about their job. Fill in the gaps. Where do you need more knowledge to do your job? Recruit, hire consultants to fill in before the GM arrives. If you don't have that financial strength on the board, if there isn't one person on the board who knows how to read a pro forma front to back really well, then who are you going to get to join the board who can, or who are you going to hire to be your backup? Maybe you need to have an ongoing relationship with Don Moffat. Maybe you need, whatever it is. And I'm not joking. I've seen phenomenal boards. They just don't have that skill set. And you can't afford not to have that skill set. How are you going to find it? Okay? And this one I'm going to leave to you. Training. Just one last thing, because I wouldn't say it.
So I mean, training is essential. We use Jacqueline, we use JQ as our board trainer. So I really strongly believe, especially for a startup board, to have board training at least every other month. A dedicated time. It could be an hour and a half. It doesn't have to be a whole day, but at least an hour and a half. We do it on Zoom, and we have a board education committee, and we develop, in collaboration with JQ, we develop what we need to know, what our topics are, and a lot of it depends on the calendar. Like, when we're going to be getting financial reports, we do financial training. We'll do how to evaluate the GM training. We'll do, all kinds of training, but at least 6 times, at least every other month. Even though most of our board members have been on the board for years, we do have some new board members, but there's no substitute for that kind of refresher. And it's a chance when the board members can ask questions of a third party. I just strongly believe in board training as an ongoing activity of the board forever. Yes.
Do you include the GM in those trainings?
No, occasionally, but mostly not, because what happens when the GM is in the room usually is the GM will have a louder voice than everyone else. People will be inhibited of asking questions, and the focus will just shift. It's just about us learning. So, yep, in the back.
How many hours a month would you say your board puts in now that the store is open?
We have board meetings twice a month. Each board meeting is 2 hours. We're still doing it on Zoom. I wish we were doing it in person. Not all of our board members are comfortable. Every other month, we do an hour-and-a-half training session. Reviewing the board documents is a significant undertaking, probably takes at least a couple hours. And then the board, without their board hat on, does volunteer work, like tabling at events, being on committees, events committee, we have a community outreach committee. So that's, some board members are on those committees, some are not. So it's less intense than when we were a startup, well, before we opened. But it's still a significant commitment, and when we look for new board members, we actually have them sign a statement that they read our bylaws, they agree with our goals and missions, and that they're willing to devote the time and attention needed to do this. And we talk to them about the time commitment. It's significant. And in addition to the time, it's also a responsibility you're carrying with you all the time. You should be thinking about the co-op, how to make it successful, even when you're not in a meeting.
Is it easier to get board members now that you're open and it's a legit thing versus when you were an idea?
No, we've always been able to get board members.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, right?
Rub it in.
So, I will say that the topics that we do, usually the GM's aware what topic we're doing, and sometimes it's appropriate that I actually call the GM and I'm like, hey, we're working on this month. You got any thoughts, opinions, things you think the board needs to know more about this topic? And he'll throw in his thoughts too. You know, so it's not like he doesn't know. Okay.
Right.
You can see our
Let me
last
say,
slides.
we share with the GM, our whole calendar, what we're doing the training on and all that kind of stuff. If he really wants to come, he can. He has a life though. So.
Yeah, his thing is he'd actually rather not. For it's worth, I am going to put copies of all Fredericksburg's definitions in the Dropbox. The slides will be in there. The blank copy of the definition tools. They'll be in the Dropbox. If you're like, I'm not going to go find that later, after this, we're going to close right now. Just come write your email in here, and I'll direct email them to you. But I need you to do that if you want them direct email.